Hercule Poirot and the Vanishing Millionaire, Chapter 1. An Invitation to Thornfield Hollow. The rain had not ceased for 3 days when Captain Arthur Hastings descended from the carriage at Thornfield Hollow station, his trench coat heavy with damp, and his mood considerably heavier. He clutched in his gloved hand a creased letter bearing the unmistakable copperplate hand of Hercule Poirot, that small, precise script which seemed somehow to embody the man himself. Every loop, deliberate, every full stop a small declaration of finality. "My dear Hastings," the letter had begun, "I find myself summoned to a most curious household in Berkshire. Sir Reginald Cavendish Marlowe, whom you may recall from the affair of the Belgrave emeralds, has written to me in some agitation. He speaks of premonitions, of unease, of a household balanced upon the edge of something terrible. I have agreed to attend his weekend gathering not as a guest, but as an observer. You will accompany me, n'est-ce pas? I believe your presence shall prove most useful." The little grey cells, they have already begun to whisper. Hastings had, of course, agreed at once. One did not refuse Poirot, and besides, the prospect of a country weekend, even one shadowed by his friend's enigmatic hints, was preferable to another fortnight in his stuffy Bayswater lodgings. He found Poirot waiting beneath the Stytischen awning, fastidiously inspecting his patent leather shoes for any speck of mud. The little Belgian was, as ever, immaculate. His moustaches had been freshly waxed. His black overcoat fell with a tailor's precision. His small, neat hands rested upon the silver knob of his walking stick, as though he were a monarch surveying his realm. "Ah, mon ami," Poirot exclaimed, his green eyes brightening at the sight of his friend. "You are punctual for once. It is a small miracle, this." "Punctual? I'm 20 minutes early, you old peacock." 20 minutes early is, for Hastings, the equivalent of arriving on time. "Come, the motor car waits. Sir Reginald has sent his chauffeur, a fellow with an unfortunate squint, and a most expressive Adam's apple." The journey to Thornfield Hollow Manor wound through wet, copper-coloured woodland, where the late October leaves clung in sodden defeat to ancient oaks. Hastings, settling beside Poirot, in the rear seat of the gleaming Daimler, ventured at last to ask the question that had been turning in his mind since London. "What exactly does Sir Reginald fear, Poirot?" "Your letter was uncommonly vague." "He himself is uncommonly vague, Hastings. He speaks of footsteps in corridors that have no occupants, of papers disturbed upon his desk, of a sense, what does he call it? Of malevolence beneath the politeness of his guests. He is, I gather, a man of immense wealth, who finds himself this weekend host to 7 persons. Among them are his estranged brother, his young second wife, his daughter from his first marriage, his physician, his solicitor, a certain Lady Wexford, who is, I believe, an old flame, and a mysterious gentleman by the name of Mr. Caldwell, whose business at the house no one can quite explain. Good Lord! And he's gathered the whole pack of them under one roof. Precisement. It is, you observe, the perfect powder keg. One small spark, and poof, the explosion. "And we're to be the firemen?" Poirot smiled faintly, brushing an imagined speck from his trouser leg. "Non, mon ami. Firemen come after the fire begins. I prefer to be the man who notices the smell of paraffin before the match is struck." The car turned through a pair of weathered iron gates flanked by stone griffins, and the manor came into view through the mist, a sprawling Jacobean pile of blackened brick and mullioned windows, its 3 chimneys breathing pale smoke into the slate-grey sky. A small lake lay before it, ruffled by wind, and beyond the western wing rose a curious round tower, ivy-throttled and apparently disused. "There it is," Hastings murmured. "Thornfield Hollow. Bit of a brooder, isn't it?" "It is a house that has seen many secrets, I think," said Poirot quietly, "and which is perhaps prepared to see one more." The great oak door opened as they approached, and there stood Sir Reginald Cavendish Marlowe himself. A tall, broad-shouldered man of perhaps 60, with snow-white hair and a face deeply lined by what Hastings, with a sudden chill, thought might be more than age. There was fear in those pale blue eyes, naked, undisguised fear. "Monsieur Poirot," Sir Reginald said, taking the Belgian's small hand in both of his own. "Thank God you have come. I have not slept these 3 nights past. Calm yourself, Sir Reginald. We are here now. Tell me, has anything occurred since you wrote to me?" Sir Reginald glanced back into the dim hall. A clock ticked somewhere within. From above, faintly, came the sound of a piano, a slow, melancholy piece, played with considerable feeling. "Last night," he whispered, "someone entered my study. The lock had been forced. Nothing was taken. But upon my desk, Monsieur Poirot, was placed a single playing card, the ace of spades, and beneath it, in a hand I do not recognize, were written 3 words. And those words, monsieur," Sir Reginald swallowed, "you are next." Poirot's eyes narrowed, and the small smile that played upon his lips held no warmth whatsoever. "Then we have arrived, Hastings, not a moment too soon. Pas un moment trop tôt." Chapter 2. The gathering, beneath the chandelier dinner at Thornfield Hollow, was served in a long, panelled hall hung with the dark portraits of long-dead Cavendish Marlowes, each one staring down at the present company with what Hastings could not help feeling was a kind of disapproving foreknowledge. A great crystal chandelier presided above the polished mahogany, its 100 candles casting a trembling, golden light that played strangely upon the faces of those gathered below. Poirot, seated to Sir Reginald's right, surveyed the table with the quiet attention of a naturalist, observing a curious species of bird. Hastings, opposite him, attempted with rather less success to mask his own scrutiny behind frequent applications of the wine. Lady Beatrice Cavendish Marlowe, Sir Reginald's second wife, a striking woman of perhaps 35, with copper hair piled high and emeralds at her throat, sat at the foot of the table with the practised composure of a hostess who had learnt her role and learnt it well. Yet her eyes, Hastings noted, strayed often toward the figure of Mr. Julian Caldwell, the mysterious guest, who occupied a chair midway down the table and contributed to the conversation in monosyllables, his long fingers turning his wine-glass without, ever quite, raising it to his lips. To Beatrice's left sat Miss Evangeline Cavendish Marlowe, Sir Reginald's daughter from his first marriage, a pale, fierce-eyed young woman of perhaps 26, with the high cheek-boned beauty of her late mother and the unyielding posture of one who had decided, very young, that the world was not to be trusted. She wore black, though no one in the house was, strictly speaking, in mourning. The remainder of the company comprised Mr. Edmund Cavendish Marlowe, Sir Reginald's younger brother, a florid, hearty man, whose laughter was too loud and whose hands trembled slightly when he reached for his glass. Dr. Sebastian Thorne, the family physician, lean and watchful, with the dry, faintly ironical manner of a man who has seen too much of his fellow creatures to be much impressed by any of them. Mr. Percival Glenarvan, the solicitor, plump and pink and entirely bald, who spoke with the precise enunciation of one who charged by the syllable. And Lady Margaret Wexford, a handsome widow in her late 50s, whose pearl earrings and ivory shoulders bore the unmistakable signature of money long ago acquired, and never since troubled. "Tell me, Sir Reginald," Poirot inquired pleasantly, when the soup had been removed, "you have lived at Thornfield Hollow how long?" "All my life, monsieur. The house has been in the family since 1612, built by my ancestor Sir Hugo Cavendish Marlowe, who, I am sorry to say, was hanged for treason in the reign of Charles I. "Family tradition," remarked Edmund with a coarse laugh. "We Cavendish Marlowes always end badly. It is something we do with style. Edmund, please." Beatrice's voice was low, but the rebuke was unmistakable. "Forgive me, my dear sister-in-law. I forget that the new generation prefers euphemism to truth." Miss Evangeline's pale fingers tightened upon her butter knife, but she said nothing. "And you, Monsieur Caldwell?" Poirot turned with disarming courtesy to the silent guest. You are a friend of long standing to Sir Reginald, Mr. Caldwell raised his eyes, dark eyes, unusually so, almost black in the candlelight. A business associate, he said. His voice was deep and precisely accented, though Hastings could not have said with what accent. Sir Reginald and I are concluding certain matters this weekend. Matters? Of a private nature. Ah. Poirot inclined his head in graceful retreat. Then I shall not be so impertinent as to inquire further. But the question, Hastings thought, had been registered. Caldwell's jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly. Sir Reginald, at the head of the table, had set down his glass with rather more force than necessary. And Lady Wexford, who had hitherto contributed only the smallest of pleasantries, raised her eyes for a single sharp moment to study Mr. Caldwell, with an expression Hastings could not read at all. Conversation moved on. The fish was served. Then the saddle of mutton. Then a salmis of game. Glenarvan, the solicitor, prattled comfortably about the new motor cars and the alarming spread of bobbed hair amongst young women. Dr. Thorne, beside Hastings, made occasional dry observations to which Hastings nodded with more enthusiasm than understanding. Lady Wexford spoke charmingly of Italy. Edmund drank. It was during the pudding, a vast, glistening creme caramel, that the first peculiar incident occurred. A footman entered, bearing a small silver salver upon which lay a single sealed envelope. He approached Sir Reginald and presented it with a bow. "For me? Found beneath the door of the library not 5 minutes since, sir." Sir Reginald took the envelope. The table fell silent. Hastings, watching, saw Poirot's eyes grow very still. That quality of stillness which in Poirot always preceded the keenest attention. Sir Reginald tore open the envelope. He read the single sheet within. The colour drained from his face so swiftly that Hastings thought for a moment the old man might collapse where he sat. He set the paper down with hands that visibly trembled and rose to his feet. "Forgive me," he said hoarsely. "I am unwell. I shall retire." "Reggie, what on earth?" Beatrice half rose, but Sir Reginald waved her down. "Nothing, my dear. A small indisposition. Continue without me. Monsieur Poirot, I beg you would attend me in my study at, shall we say, 10 o'clock? Avec plaisir, monsieur." He left them. The doors closed behind him with a soft final click, and in the silence that followed, Hastings could not shake the conviction that they had all of them, every one of them, around that gleaming candle-lit table, been waiting for precisely this moment, though none knew quite what to do with it now that it had come. Chapter 3. The Empty Study. At 10 o'clock precisely, Poirot rapped upon the door of Sir Reginald's study. There was no reply. He rapped a second time, more firmly. Still nothing. "Curious," murmured Poirot. Hastings, standing at his shoulder, tried the handle. The door yielded, but only an inch. Something heavy lay behind it. "I say, Poirot, push, mon ami." Gently, they pushed together. The obstruction shifted, a fallen chair as it proved, and the door swung inward upon a scene that Hastings, even years afterward, would not forget. The study was a small, panelled room, lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound volumes. A great mahogany desk stood before the curtained window. Upon the desk burned a single oil lamp, its wick turned low. The fire in the grate had burned down to a few sullen embers. The chair behind the desk was thrust back at an angle, as though its occupant had risen in haste. And of Sir Reginald Cavendish Marlowe there was no sign whatsoever. "He has gone out," Hastings ventured. "Stepped out a moment, perhaps. The door, Hastings. Observe the door." Hastings turned. The heavy oak door, now standing open behind them, bore upon its inner face a brass bolt, and that bolt had plainly, until their entry, been thrown shut. The fallen chair had been wedged beneath the handle. The window, when Poirot drew back the curtain, proved to be both shut and latched from within, with a small rose bush growing directly beneath it, whose unbroken twigs spoke their own quiet evidence. "The room," said Poirot softly, "was sealed from inside, and yet you see our host is not within it. But that's impossible. Impossible, mon ami, is a word I have learnt to mistrust, let us say, rather. Ingenious. He moved about the room with that quick, almost dancing precision that Hastings knew so well, his eyes darting everywhere. He examined the fireplace, knelt to peer up the flue, ran his small white fingers along the wainscot, tapped at the panels behind the desk. He paused at the desk itself, where, beneath the lamp, a single sheet of writing paper lay face down. He turned it over with the tip of a pencil. It was blank. "The note he received at dinner," Poirot murmured. "Where is it, this note?" A swift search of the desk drawers, the waste paper basket, the pockets of a smoking jacket draped upon the back of the chair revealed nothing. The note had vanished as completely as its recipient. Poirot the bolt, the chair beneath the handle. These can't have been done by Sir Reginald himself if he isn't here. Precisement, which means, Hastings, that either Sir Reginald is here, concealed somewhere within these walls, or beneath these floors, or else the room was made to appear sealed by some other agency, after he had been removed from it. Removed? You mean, I mean, mon ami, that the millionaire of Thornfield Hollow has vanished, and I do not believe it has been done by his own choosing. It was at this moment that a small sound caused them both to turn. The soft creak of a floorboard in the corridor without. Poirot moved with surprising speed for so portly a gentleman. He reached the doorway in 3 brisk steps and looked out. Miss Evangeline Cavendish Marlowe stood at the head of the corridor, candle in hand, her pale face composed, but her dark eyes very wide indeed. "Mademoiselle, you are abroad late. I heard voices. I thought, father? Your father is not here, mademoiselle. Not here. But I saw him enter not half an hour since. I heard him bolt the door from within. I was passing along the corridor." "You are quite certain, mademoiselle, that you heard the bolt?" "Quite certain. There is a particular sound, a small, sharp metallic note. I have heard it 1,000 times. Poirot regarded her in silence for a long moment. Then he inclined his head with grave courtesy. "Thank you, mademoiselle. Pray do not speak of this to the others until the morning. Captain Hastings and I shall make such inquiries as are necessary." When she had withdrawn, her candle's small flame trembling along the corridor wall until it vanished round the corner, Poirot turned back into the room and stood for a long while. In silence, his small hands folded behind his back, his eyes moving with measured slowness across every inch of the panelling. "Hastings," he said at last, "a man does not vanish from a sealed room. Therefore, one of 3 things must be true. Either the room was not, in fact, sealed when he left it, and was sealed afterward by another, or the man did not, in fact, vanish, but is concealed within these walls, or—" Poirot's eyes glittered. "The man is not, in fact, a man, but a most accomplished liar who has staged his own disappearance for purposes of his own. You think Sir Reginald arranged this himself? I think, mon ami, that until we know which of these 3 things is true, we know nothing at all. Come, let us rouse the household. The night, I fear, has only just begun." Chapter 4. A House Without Its Master. The household was assembled in the great drawing-room shortly before midnight, each member arriving in some variant of dressing-gown and dismay. The fire had been built up against the autumn chill, and tea was brought, though few drank it. Lady Beatrice sat very upright upon the chaise longue, her hand pressed against her throat, where the emeralds had been replaced by a string of small pearls. "He cannot simply have disappeared," she kept repeating, her voice thin and rising. "Reggie is not a man to vanish. He is a man who arrives. He arrives everywhere on time. He has never been late for anything in his life." "Quite so, dear lady," murmured Mr. Glenarvan, dabbing his pink brow with a vast handkerchief. "Quite so. The thing is, most irregular." Dr. Thorne, who had been examining the room with the same dry, detached interest he might have brought to a particularly puzzling case of fever, observed quietly, "Has anyone considered the possibility that Reggie has simply decided to take a walk? At midnight, in the rain, without his coat?" Lady Beatrice's eyes flashed. "Don't be absurd, Sebastian. My dear Beatrice, I have known your husband 40 years, and absurdity has, on occasion, been within his repertoire. Edmund. Slumped in the armchair nearest the brandy, decanter gave a short laugh. Reggie always was theatrical, probably staging some new diversion. He'll appear at breakfast looking pleased with himself. You mark my words. Mr. Cavendish Marlowe, said Poirot quietly. Your brother had been receiving threats. A card was placed upon his desk last night, bearing the words, This evening, at dinner, a sealed envelope was delivered to him, whose contents caused him to leave the table in evident distress. Half an hour later, he is gone from a sealed room. I confess, monsieur, I find your levity remarkable. Edmund flushed. The brandy in his hand sloshed dangerously. That is to say, I had no notion of any threats. Reggie never confided in me. Not in 20 years. And why, monsieur, has there been such estrangement between you? That, Monsieur Poirot, is a family matter, indeed, and the family at present finds itself one member short. Poirot's voice was velvet, but there was iron beneath it. I should be most obliged. Edmund glared, but at length muttered, Money, as it always is. Our father divided the estate unevenly. Reggie inherited Thornfield and the bulk of the fortune. I received a small annuity and the freehold of a manor in Wiltshire which has cost me more in upkeep than it has ever returned. And you have, in consequence, been in financial difficulty? I have been in financial catastrophe, monsieur, for upwards of 15 years. Reggie knows. He has refused to assist me. We have not spoken civilly in over a decade. And yet you are here this weekend. He invited me, heaven knows why. I came because I had nothing better to do, and he keeps a tolerable cellar. Poirot turned next to Lady Wexford, who sat by the fire with her hands folded in her lap, the picture of patient gentility. Madame, you have known Sir Reginald some years, I understand. A great many years, Monsieur Poirot. Reggie and I were at one time engaged to be married. That was, 35 years ago, before he married his first wife. We have remained friends. Friends only? A faint colour rose in her cheek. Friends only, monsieur. I am not the woman I was at 23. And your business here this weekend? Reggie wrote to me a fortnight since, asking that I come. He said he wished to consult me upon a personal matter. He did not specify. You did not press him for details? With Reggie, monsieur, one does not press. Poirot inclined his head and turned at last to Mr. Julian Caldwell, who had remained throughout these proceedings standing by the window, his back half turned, his expression unreadable. Monsieur Caldwell, your business with Sir Reginald, you have told us, was of a private nature. I have. I should be grateful to know its character now. Caldwell turned slowly. In the firelight his face seemed even more saturnine than it had at dinner. Monsieur Poirot, what passed between Sir Reginald and myself was a matter of strictest confidence. Until I have his permission to divulge it, I shall not do so. Even though the gentleman has vanished. Especially because the gentleman has vanished. I will speak when he reappears. And if he does not reappear, Caldwell's dark eyes did not waver. Then we shall see, monsieur, we shall see. There was a silence. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the depths of the great house, a clock struck the half-hour, and the small, brassy chime seemed to Hastings to hang in the air for a strangely long time. Very well, said Poirot at last. I shall ask no more tonight. The local police have been summoned by telephone. Until they arrive at first light, I must ask that no one leaves the house. The grounds will be searched at dawn. The household will be re-examined in the morning. I shall require interviews with each of you, separately, in this room. Are we suspects, Monsieur Poirot? Miss Evangeline's voice was cold. You are, mademoiselle. The persons who were present when an event occurred. Whether you are suspects or witnesses, that is for the morning to determine. When they had at last dispersed, each to a separate, sleepless chamber, Hastings drew Poirot aside. Poirot, do you suspect one of them? I suspect, Hastings, all of them, and none. That is the proper attitude of the investigator at this stage. To narrow too soon is to be deceived. Tell me, mon ami, what struck you most? Hastings considered. Caldwell. He's hiding something. Caldwell hides a great deal, yes. But he is not the only one. Did you observe, when Sir Reginald rose from the dinner table, the face of Lady Beatrice? I confess I was watching Sir Reginald. Ah, but I was watching Lady Beatrice, and she, mon ami, she was watching not her husband but Mr. Caldwell, and upon her face was an expression I cannot quite forget. What expression? Relief, Hastings. The most curious, fleeting expression of relief, as though something she had feared had now, at last, begun to occur. Chapter 5. The ivy and the footprint dawn at Thornfield Hollow came reluctantly, the sun a pale disk behind veils of moving mist. The rain had at last ceased, but the gardens were sodden, the gravel walks darkened with water, and a thin smoke of vapour rose from the lake, as though the place itself were breathing in its sleep. Inspector Henley Goodwin, of the Berkshire Constabulary, arrived at 7:15. A tall, lean man with a sandy moustache, and the unhurried manner of a country policeman, who has learnt that haste is the enemy of accuracy. He shook Poirot's hand with proper deference, having heard the name and being possessed of more sense than vanity. Monsieur Poirot. An honour, sir. I'm told we've a missing master of the house. Vanished, Inspector, from a sealed study at approximately 9:30 last evening. Sealed how, sir? The door bolted from within, the window latched and unbroken. The chimney too narrow for a child, and yet our host, he is not there. Inspector Goodwin permitted himself the small, dry smile of one who has heard many curiosities in his time. Well, sir, in my experience, when a man vanishes from a sealed room, the room weren't quite so sealed as folk thought. With your permission, sir, I'll have a look. The inspector's examination of the study was thorough, but yielded little that Poirot had not already observed. He confirmed the bolt had indeed been engaged. He confirmed the window's latch was undisturbed. He confirmed with a sigh that was almost regretful that no secret panel betrayed itself to his probing fingers in any of the wainscot. It was, however, in the garden that the morning's first true discovery was made. A constable, sent to examine the ground beneath the study window, returned with the announcement that, although the rose bush directly under the casement was indeed unbroken, there was, some 6 feet to the right of it, a place upon the soft earth where the gravel of the path had been disturbed, and beyond that, in the flower bed, the clear impression of 2 footprints, facing the house. Poirot, with Hastings and the inspector following, hurried out to inspect. The prints were a man's, broad, deep, made by a boot with a distinctive curved heel. They were sunk perhaps half an inch into the wet loam, and they were placed oddly, side by side, as though the maker had stood quite still in that one spot, facing the wall of the house, for some little time. They do not approach the wall, Poirot murmured. They do not depart from it, they simply exist. Here, as if a man had been set down upon the earth at this spot, stood for a moment, and then been lifted away. Or, said the inspector practically, as if he'd come from one direction across the gravel, which would not show prints, stood here, then returned the way he came. Possible, Inspector. Most possible. And yet, Poirot bent low, peering at the prints. Observe, if you would, the depth. They are markedly deep. Either the man was heavy, or he was carrying something heavy. A body, sir? The inspector's voice was carefully neutral. Or some other burden. Hastings. The ivy upon the western tower. Examine it for me. Hastings, considerably mystified, made his way across the lawn to the round tower he had noticed upon their arrival. The ancient ivy that throttled it was, he saw at once, disturbed in one particular place. About 10 feet from the ground, a section of the vines had been recently torn or wrenched, and several broken tendrils hung limp and pale where the sap had bled. Poirot, up here, the ivy's been damaged. Poirot crossed the lawn with surprising briskness. He gazed up at the broken vines, then at the small, narrow window, barely more than an arrow's slit, set into the tower's stone wall about 20 feet above the ground. "The tower," he said softly. "It connects to the house, does it not?" "Yes, monsieur," said the inspector. "There's a passage from the western wing. The tower itself is disused, I'm told. It used to be a folly and a guest room, but it's been shut up these 40 years. Then we must, I think, open it." The key was procured, with some difficulty, from a flustered housekeeper who declared she had not had occasion to use it since Lady Cavendish Marlowe, the first wife, had died. The corridor that led from the western wing to the tower was narrow, low-ceilinged, and choked with dust. Poirot, Hastings, and the inspector advanced by the light of an electric torch, and the air grew colder with each step. The door to the tower itself stood, when they reached it, slightly ajar. "Not locked," murmured Poirot, "and yet the housekeeper assures us no one has been here in 40 years. Inside the tower was a single circular chamber, perhaps 15 feet in diameter, with a stone floor and a narrow spiral stair winding upward. Dust lay thick upon every surface, except, Hastings noted with a sudden quickening of his pulse, in 2 distinct trails, one leading to the foot of the stair and one returning. They mounted the stair. At the top was a small landing and a second door, this one ajar also. Beyond it lay an octagonal chamber, what had once, long ago, been a guest room. A canopied bed stood in one corner, its hangings rotted to lace. A writing desk leaned against the wall. A great oaken chest occupied the centre of the floor. Upon the chest, in the dust, were marks where something had recently rested. And beside the chest, almost concealed by its bulk, lay a small object that caught the light of the inspector's torch. Poirot stooped and lifted it. It was a single gold cufflink, engraved with a small letter R. "Reginald," whispered Hastings. "Reginald," agreed Poirot. "He has been here, mon ami, within the past few hours. He has been brought, or has come, to this tower." And then Poirot raised his eyes to the small window high in the wall, where the broken ivy gave its silent testimony. And then perhaps he has left it by another route. Alive or otherwise, we do not yet know, but we know now, Hastings, that this affair is no caprice, no theatrical disappearance of a millionaire, grown bored with his life. Someone has brought him here, someone within this house, and someone, mon ami, knows the way. Chapter 6. The Lady at the Piano. The interviews that morning were conducted in the small library off the great hall, a room Poirot had selected for its single door and the absence of any concealed entrance through which an inquisitive ear might be applied. Hastings sat in the corner with notebook and pencil, while the inspector took the chair beside the fireplace, and Poirot, behind the desk, arranged before him a small line of pencils with meticulousness of a surgeon laying out his instruments. Lady Beatrice was the first to be summoned. She came in a morning dress of dove grey, her copper hair drawn back simply, her eyes shadowed but composed. She sat opposite Poirot with the air of a woman who has rehearsed her part and means to perform it well. "Lady Beatrice, I shall be direct if I may. You have been married to Sir Reginald how long?" 6 years this June, monsieur. "And before your marriage?" "I was a Miss Caroline Beatrice Linden. My family is from Shropshire. My father was a clergyman, my mother the daughter of a clergyman. I have 3 sisters. Your husband is, I believe, considerably your senior." "He is 28 years my senior, Monsieur Poirot. I do not pretend the marriage was a love match upon my side. It has, nonetheless, been an entirely civil one." "Civil, that is a word with much packed within it, madame." She held his gaze. "I do not deceive my husband, monsieur, if that is what you imply. I do not love him as one loves a young man, but I respect him, and I have been a faithful wife." "And Monsieur Caldwell, madame?" The colour rose in her face, slightly, but unmistakably. "Mr. Caldwell is a business acquaintance of my husband's." "You knew him before this weekend?" "I had met him on 2 previous occasions in London, at dinners. Only, monsieur." Poirot watched her for a long moment in silence. Then he said, with great gentleness, "Madame, last evening, when your husband received the letter at dinner, I observed your face. You were watching Monsieur Caldwell, and the expression in your eyes, madame, it was— how shall I say it? Not the expression of a woman who has met a gentleman twice at dinners in London. She did not answer at once. Her hands tightened upon her grey lap. At length she said very low, "Monsieur Poirot, I will be honest with you, because I do not wish my silence to be construed as guilt. I knew Julian Caldwell before I knew my husband. We were, for a brief period before my marriage, engaged. Informally. There was no announcement. Julian was not, at that time, in a financial position to marry. My father pressed me toward Reginald. I broke with Julian, and the matter ended. And he has since continued to seek you." "No, monsieur, we did not communicate for years. I was as astonished as anyone when, 6 months ago, my husband mentioned that he was conducting business with a Mr. Caldwell, and I discovered on meeting him that it was Julian." "You did not tell your husband of your prior acquaintance?" "I did not. Julian asked that I refrain. He said it would compromise the business." "And what was this business, madame?" "I do not know, monsieur. Reginald was not a man who shared the details of his affairs with his wife." Poirot regarded her thoughtfully. "Tell me, madame, were you in your room from 9 o'clock last evening?" "I was in my sitting room from 9:15 until 10, when I retired to my bedchamber. I was at my pianoforte. Anyone passing in the corridor would have heard me. The piece you played, I think I heard it. A slow piece, most melancholy. Chopin, the Nocturne in E flat, then later the C sharp minor. Yes, I remember now." From the corridor outside Sir Reginald's study, the sound came faintly. "Curious how a piano carries through an old house, n'est-ce pas?" "Curious indeed, monsieur." He let her go. As the door closed, Poirot leaned back in his chair and said quietly, "Hastings, the inspector. What do you make of that?" "She was Caldwell's fiancée," said Hastings. "That changes things." "It changes everything, mon ami. A discarded lover, brought back into the orbit of a wealthy husband, conducting mysterious business with that same husband. The motives, they bloom like roses." "Sir, I'd like to know what that business was," said Inspector Goodwin grimly. "As should I." "Inspector, as should I. Let us see whom we shall examine next. Mr. Edmund Cavendish Marlowe gave little he had not given the previous evening, save for the surly admission that he had spent the hours between 9 and 10 in the billiard room, alone, and could produce no witness to his solitude. Mr. Glenarvan, the solicitor, Sylvester confessed himself to have been in his bedchamber writing letters, which the housekeeper confirmed, having seen him do when she brought him a final whisky at 20 minutes to 10. Lady Wexford had been in the conservatory reading, and Dr. Thorne, after the dinner, had retired with a book to the smoking room, where 2 servants had attended him at various intervals. Miss Evangeline, summoned last among the family members, gave her account with the same self-contained gravity she had shown the previous night. "I dined, monsieur. I retired to the gallery at the head of the main staircase, where I read for perhaps half an hour. Then I walked along the upstairs corridor to my own room, intending to go to bed. As I passed the study door, I heard my father within, the small sound of his desk drawer, then the bolt being shot. I went on to my room. You did not speak to him?" "I did not. My father and I had quarrelled that afternoon. We were not on speaking terms." "You quarrelled, mademoiselle. About what?" She hesitated for the first time. "About money, monsieur. I had wished to make a gift. A substantial gift. To a charitable institution with which I am closely associated. My father refused his permission. His permission was required. My income, until my 30th birthday, is administered by trustees of whom he is the senior. I am 26. I shall come into my mother's estate in full in 4 years' time. Until then I cannot dispose of more than a small allowance without his consent. Ah, and this charitable institution. It is a home for young women in difficulty in the East End of London. My mother founded it. I have continued her work. A worthy cause, mademoiselle. My father did not think so. The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. Poirot let it lie. He thanked her with grave courtesy, and she withdrew. It was Mr. Caldwell who came last, and he sat down opposite Poirot with the air of a man preparing to give nothing. "Monsieur Caldwell, the inspector and I have a single question for you, and we beg you will answer it truthfully. Where were you between 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock last evening?" "In my bedchamber, monsieur. Alone. I retired immediately after dinner." "You will, of course, be unable to prove this." "I shall not attempt to, monsieur. I tell you only the truth." "You do not seem alarmed, monsieur, at the disappearance of your business associate." For the first time, Caldwell's calm wavered. A muscle moved in his jaw. "I am, Monsieur Poirot, more alarmed than I have any intention of showing. Sir Reginald and I had matters in train which his disappearance has thrown into the most extreme jeopardy. Make of that what you will." He rose, bowed, and left them. When the door had closed, Inspector Goodwin let out a long breath. A cool one, that, and no mistake. "Cool, Inspector, yes. But did you observe?" Beneath the coolness, a man entirely out of his depth. He is not the master of this affair. He is at the mercy of it. That, I think, we may take as the first true fact we have learnt this morning. Chapter 7. The Sapphire and the Substituted Glass. It was during the searching of the bedchambers, a measure Inspector Goodwin had, with proper apology, insisted upon, that the second curious discovery of the day was made. In Sir Reginald's own bedchamber, behind a panel of the wardrobe, was a small wall safe, the door of which stood ajar. The constable who found it called for the inspector, who in turn summoned Poirot. The three men examined the safe in silence. It had not been forced. It had been opened with a key, or with knowledge of its combination, and then left open by someone who had not bothered to close it again, or by someone who had been interrupted. Within the safe were various documents of a private nature, several leather-bound notebooks, and a velvet jewel case, which, when Poirot lifted it gently and raised the lid, was found to be empty. "Lady Beatrice," said the inspector. "Beg pardon, ma'am. But might we trouble you to identify what should be in this case?" Lady Beatrice, summoned hastily, came into the room and stopped short upon seeing the empty velvet. Her face went white. "The Marlowe sapphire," she said softly. "It is gone." "The Marlowe sapphire being?" "A pendant, Inspector. A single sapphire, dark as a midnight sea, mounted in white gold. It has been in my husband's family for 9 generations. It is valued, I believe, at upwards of £40,000. It was a wedding gift to me from my husband. He insisted that, save when I wore it, it should be kept in his safe rather than mine." "And when did you last see it, ma'am?" 3 days ago. I wore it to a luncheon at the Wexfords." "It was returned to the safe?" "It was returned by me in my husband's presence that same evening." Poirot turned the empty case in his hands with thoughtful gravity. "Sir Reginald, of course, knew the combination." "Of course. Anyone else?" She hesitated. I do not think so. Reginald was most particular. You yourself do not know it." "I do not, monsieur." "Curious. A wife who does not know the combination of the safe in which her own jewels are kept." She flushed but said nothing. When she had been dismissed, Poirot stood for a long while in silent contemplation, turning the empty velvet case over and over in his small hands. "Hastings," he said at last, "the sapphire is gone. The master is gone. Are these two facts related, or are they distinct?" "Surely related, Poirot. Surely. Mon ami, in the affairs of crime, nothing is surely anything. They may be related as cause and effect. They may be related as coincidence, though Poirot, he does not love coincidence. Or they may be designed, the one to conceal the other. Tell me, what is the most natural explanation?" "Sir Reginald was robbed. The thief took the sapphire and abducted Sir Reginald, or murdered him." "And the second most natural?" "Sir Reginald took the sapphire himself, vanished himself, and means to begin a new life with the proceeds." "And the third, Hastings, which is perhaps the most interesting of all. I confess I cannot think of a third." Poirot smiled, that small austere smile of his. "The third, mon ami, is this. that the sapphire was taken by one person and Sir Reginald by another, and we, in supposing them to be the same person, are precisely where the cleverer of the two means us to be. He set down the velvet case and turned to the door. Come, there is yet another matter I must examine. The dining room, the dinner glasses, they have not, I trust, all been washed. It transpired that by sheerest good fortune, the under-butler, a conscientious man of 40-odd years named Pritchard, had set aside Sir Reginald's wine, glass after dinner the previous evening, intending to wash it separately, since the master had, as the butler delicately put it, left rather sudden, and the glass had not been finished. Poirot received this news with a small sharp intake of breath. The glass was produced. He bent over it with his nostrils delicately flaring, then, with the inspector's permission, lifted it to the light of the window. Hastings, Inspector, observe. There remained in the bottom of the glass, perhaps half an inch of dark red wine, but about the rim of the glass, barely visible, was a faint milky residue, scarcely more than a trace that had not been left by the wine alone. There has been something added, murmured Poirot. Something, what is the word? Soluble in wine, but not entirely. A small powder that has not quite dissolved. Poison, whispered Hastings, or sedative, mon ami. A man who is to be removed from a sealed room. What is more convenient than that he should first be rendered unable to resist his own removal? The inspector, with great care, had the glass packed and dispatched to a chemist in Reading whom he knew and trusted. The answer, when it came by motor courier some 5 hours later, was succinct. The residue contained chloral hydrate, a powerful sleeping draught, in a quantity sufficient to render a grown man unconscious within 15 to 20 minutes of consumption. Then he was drugged at dinner, said Hastings. He was drugged at dinner, mon ami. And drugged by whom? Not, surely, by a guest at some distance from his glass. Drugged by someone who had access, direct, intimate access, to that glass before or during the meal. A servant? Perhaps. Or someone who passed close beside his chair. Tell me, Hastings, you who were watching at dinner, did any guest at any time approach Sir Reginald's place? Hastings thought hard. He thought of the slow procession of courses, of the conversation flowing and ebbing, of the candlelight upon faces. Yes, he said at last, slowly. Yes, Poirot, I had forgotten, between the fish and the meat. Lady Wexford rose. She crossed to Sir Reginald's place, leaned over him, and whispered something in his ear. She held, yes, I am quite sure, she held a small handkerchief in her hand. Poirot's eyes went very still. Lady Wexford, he said, the old flame, the friend of many years, who came at his invitation, to consult upon a personal matter never specified. He stood quite motionless, for a long moment, his small hands folded behind his back. Hastings, he said at last very quietly, I begin to see the shape of this thing, but not yet the whole. There is something more, a piece I have not yet found. Come, let us walk in the garden a little. The little grey cells, they require air. Chapter 8. The letter in the bureau. The garden walk produced, however, no immediate revelation, only a fine drizzle that drove them at length back indoors. It was Hastings who, in attempting to dry his hat in the gun-room that opened off the main hall, made the next discovery, entirely by accident. The gun-room contained, besides racks of sporting guns and a quantity of dusty fishing tackle, a small writing bureau of walnut, much battered, evidently used for the keeping of game records and shooting accounts. As Hastings set his damp hat upon it, his elbow knocked against the front, which proved to be insecurely latched. The flap fell open. Within were sporting ledgers, a box of cartridges, a faded photograph of 3 young men with a brace of pheasants, and, tucked between the leaves of a 1923 game book, a folded sheet of writing, paper. Hastings drew it out. It was not, as he had half expected, a record of bagged grouse. It was a letter, in a woman's hand, undated and unaddressed. My darling, I cannot continue thus. The torment of our position grows daily more unbearable. R suspects nothing, but the strain of pretending in his presence is destroying me. If we cannot soon find a way, I shall confess everything. I would rather face his rage than this perpetual lie. Burn this. M. Hastings stared at the letter for a long, slow moment. Then he carried it, his heart beating uncomfortably, in search of Poirot. He found his friend in the morning room. In conversation with Inspector Goodwin upon some technical matter of locks, Poirot's eyes, when they fell upon the letter, took on at once that particular brightness, which always preceded swift thought. "Where did you find this, Hastings?" "In the bureau of the gun-room, tucked into an old game-book." "The gun-room, which is used by whom?" "Sir Reginald, principally. The inspector tells me his shooting parties were celebrated affairs, but anyone could enter it. It is not locked. And the handwriting? I do not recognise it." "But the initial—" "M. Margaret," said Inspector Goodwin slowly. "Margaret Wexford. It might be Margaret. It might equally be Mary, or Maud, or Maeve. Let us not leap, gentlemen, into the conclusion that lies most temptingly before us." But even as he spoke, Poirot's eyes did not leave the letter. R. suspects nothing so. The lady, whoever she be, was conducting an affair beneath the nose of one R. Whom might that be? "Reginald," said Hastings, "or Roderick, or Rupert, or Ronald, mon ami. But yes, Reginald is the name nearest to hand." "If it is Lady Wexford," said Inspector Goodwin, "and if it is Sir Reginald who suspected nothing, then who, sir, is the darling? That, Inspector, is the question, and it has more than one possible answer." Poirot folded the letter carefully and placed it in his pocket-book. "Let us not yet show our hand. The letter we keep to ourselves. But we shall, I think, give Lady Wexford a small opportunity to reveal herself." The opportunity was provided that afternoon when Poirot, with elaborate casualness, encountered Lady Wexford in the gallery overlooking the gardens. She was, as it happened, gazing at a portrait of the First Lady Cavendish Marlowe, Evangeline's mother, a dark-haired beauty with sad, intelligent eyes. "A handsome woman," Poirot observed. "She was. I knew her, monsieur. She was my dearest friend. Truly, I had not realised. We were at school together. Hortense was. She was the finest woman I have ever known. Reginald did not deserve her." "You did not approve, then, of the marriage?" "I did not approve of his treatment of her. She was unhappy for the last 10 years of her life, monsieur, and her unhappiness was of his making." "In what way, madam?" Lady Wexford hesitated. Then, with a kind of dignified weariness, she said, "There were other women. There were always other women. Reggie had, a great appetite for what he could not have, and a great cruelty toward what he could. Hortense bore it with such grace as she could muster. She died at 47 of pneumonia, but I have always believed she died, in truth, of grief." "And the second Lady Cavendish Marlowe, Beatrice?" "A young woman married to an old satyr for his money, monsieur. She has my sympathy, not my censure." Poirot studied her in silence. Then, very gently, he said, "Madame, letter has been found in the gun-room. It speaks of a clandestine love and is signed with the initial M. It speaks of one R, who suspects nothing. Was that letter, madame, written by you?" She turned her face toward him with a small, sad smile. "It was not, monsieur. I have not loved a man for nearly 40 years, and I am unlikely to begin again. But I think I know whose hand it may be in." "Whose, madame?" She gazed at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Hortense, the First Lady Cavendish Marlowe." Her hand was small, sloping and rounded. "If your letter shows those qualities, monsieur, look no further. But the letter is recent. Or, is it? Letters keep, monsieur. They keep in old game-books for many years." Poirot was silent. When he found Hastings again, the small Belgian's eyes were unusually grave. "Hastings, if the letter is from the First Lady Cavendish Marlowe, if it is 20 years old, and not 20 days, then it speaks of a different affair, entirely. The R who suspects nothing is the husband. The darling is some other man. And we have, mon ami, an entirely new question." "What question, Poirot? Who was Hortense Cavendish Marlowe's lover 20 years ago? And what does that lover have to do with the events of this weekend? Chapter 9. Of wills and other bequests, it was Mr. Percival Glenarvan, the solicitor, who provided, under the careful pressure of Inspector Goodwin's questioning, the next piece of the puzzle. He came into the library that afternoon with an air of considerable reluctance, his pink brow already glistening, his small mouth pursed in professional disapproval. He sat opposite Poirot and the inspector with the manner of a man who would prefer to be elsewhere. "Gentlemen, you must understand the confidentiality of my client, Mr. Glenarvan," said Inspector Goodwin patiently. "Your client is missing, and there is reason to believe his life is in danger or already extinguished. The confidentiality of a deceased or vanished client is, in this officer's experience, somewhat reduced. He is not provably deceased, Inspector, nor is he provably alive. The matter is in suspense. I should remind you, sir, that obstruction of an inquiry of this gravity is a matter the Director of Public Prosecutions takes a most disagreeable view of." Mr. Glenarvan dabbed his brow. Very well. But I tell you this under protest, gentlemen. Duly noted. Sir Reginald summoned me to Thornfield this weekend specifically to alter his will. He had instructed me, by letter a fortnight since, to bring with me the existing instrument and to prepare such codicils as he should require. And what alterations did he intend? He intended, well, the alterations were substantial. The existing will, executed in 1924, left the bulk of his estate to his daughter Evangeline, with substantial annuities to his brother Edmund and his wife Beatrice, and various charitable and personal bequests. The intended new will, gentlemen, was to leave the bulk of the estate to Lady Beatrice, with reduced provisions for Miss Evangeline, and the cessation of all annuities to his brother. There was a short silence. "And Sir Reginald," said Poirot very softly, "had communicated the contents of this proposed new will to the parties affected." Mr. Glenarvan hesitated. He had communicated certain particulars to certain parties. Yes. To whom? To his daughter. He told her on the afternoon of his arrival here, that is on Friday afternoon, that her inheritance was to be substantially reduced. Was she informed why? He told her, I believe, that her involvement with the East End institution she favoured had displeased him beyond endurance. And to his brother? He had not, to my knowledge, informed Edmund directly, but I understand from Edmund's own remarks to me yesterday morning that he had, somehow, learned of the intended change. "Somehow," murmured Poirot. "And the new will, Monsieur Glenarvan, has it been signed?" "It has not, monsieur. It was to have been signed this morning, in the presence of 2 witnesses. Sir Reginald had selected myself and Dr. Thorne, and the old will, the will of 1924 that remains in force." "It remains in force, monsieur." A small smile, infinitely sad, crossed Poirot's lips. "Then, monsieur, we have here what is in the trade called a motive. The daughter who learns that her inheritance is to be slashed. The brother who learns that his annuity is to cease. Both stand to lose substantially if Sir Reginald lives to sign the new will. Both stand to retain everything if he dies, or vanishes before the ink is set." "But you cannot suspect Miss Evangeline, surely?" exclaimed Mr. Glenarvan. "A young lady of such convictions, monsieur, that her father was prepared to disinherit her over them. Convictions are a powerful engine, sir. They have driven persons of high principle to acts that astonish the practical man." When the solicitor had withdrawn, mopping freely, Poirot turned to the inspector and to Hastings with a face grown thoughtful. "My friends, the pieces of this affair they multiply. We have a vanished master, a sealed room, a drugged glass of wine, a footprint beneath a window, a torn ivy on a tower, a cuff-link in a dust-laden chamber, a stolen sapphire, a letter, perhaps 20 years old, speaking of a clandestine love, a daughter being disinherited, a brother stripped of his annuity, a second wife whose former lover is conducting mysterious business with her husband. "And which of these," said the inspector, "matters?" "All of them, Inspector. Everyone. That is the beauty of a well-laid plot. Every detail bears weight. The question is, mon ami, which weighs upon which. And there is one detail more, I think, that we have not yet quite understood." "Which?" "The piano, Hastings. The piano. Lady Beatrice told us she played in her sitting room from 9:15 until 10, the Chopin nocturnes, and I heard her play faintly from the corridor outside the study. Yes, you agreed with this?" "Yes, Poirot." "But, mon ami, at what time did I hear her play?" Hastings thought. When we came up to the study at 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock, exactly. And what nocturne, mon ami, was she playing then?" I really couldn't say, nor could I, but I heard the piano, Hastings. And tomorrow? Tomorrow I shall ask Lady Beatrice to play for me again. The same nocturne she played at 10 o'clock last night. And we shall, my friend, listen most carefully." "To what?" Poirot smiled his small austere smile. "To whether the same hand played at all." Chapter 10. A body in the lake. It was on Sunday morning, shortly after 8, that the gardener's boy, sent down to the boathouse to fetch a coil of rope, came running back across the dew-wet lawn, with the news that there was something floating in the reeds at the lake's western edge. Inspector Goodwin, with 2 constables and the more reluctant assistance of Poirot, made his way down through the mist. The lake lay flat and pewter-grey, the surface scarcely rippled. Among the brown reeds near the western bank, half submerged, was the dark shape of a man's body. It was Sir Reginald Cavendish Marlowe. He was face down, his black dinner clothes saturated, one shoe missing, the other still upon his foot. The body, when at length they drew it ashore, was rigid, the eyes closed, the features placid. There was a single livid mark upon the right temple where the skull had been struck. A heavy, blunt blow dealt with considerable force. Dr. Thorne, summoned in haste, knelt by the body and examined it with the same calm, ironical detachment he had shown throughout the affair. He rose at length and said, in the dry voice of a man delivering a professional finding, "He has been dead at least 36 hours. The blow to the head, mother, would have rendered him unconscious immediately and dead within minutes. He did not drown. There is no water in the lungs that I can detect without proper examination. But the appearance is wrong for drowning. He was killed elsewhere, and his body placed in the lake afterward. When? That I cannot say to the hour, but the body has been in the water since at latest yesterday afternoon, possibly earlier." "Or even Friday night," murmured Poirot, soon after he vanished from the study. "Quite possibly, monsieur." The household was gathered, with as much delicacy as might be managed, in the drawing-room shortly thereafter. Lady Beatrice took the news with a single sharp gasp, and then a stillness that was perhaps more eloquent than any cry. Miss Evangeline turned very white, but did not weep. Edmund Cavendish Marlowe poured himself a brandy with a hand that shook so violently he spilled the half of it. Lady Wexford bent her head and pressed a handkerchief to her eyes. Mr. Caldwell stood motionless by the window, his face an unreadable mask. Mr. Glenarvan began at once to issue a series of small, distressed exclamations, and Dr. Thorne went round the room with the easy professional touch of a doctor, accustomed to administering sympathy as a controlled substance. Poirot watched. He watched every face. He watched not only what each person did, but what each person did not do. Who looked at whom, and who looked at no one, and whose eyes, in the brief moment when no one else was watching, were sharp with calculation rather than grief. "My friends," he said at last, when the first storm had passed, "I shall not detain you long. The investigation now becomes one of murder. The inspector, with my assistants, will be conducting further inquiries throughout this day. I ask, with all gravity, that no person leave the grounds. The reasons are obvious. By this evening, I am confident, we shall have an answer." "This evening?" repeated Lady Beatrice faintly. "By this evening, madam, yes. I shall require the company of all present to assemble in this drawing-room at, shall we say, 7 o'clock. I shall then have certain matters to disclose. Until that hour, I beg you will compose yourselves as best you may. Captain Hastings, a word, if you please." Outside, in the chill corridor, Hastings turned to his friend in some agitation. "Poirot, by this evening, are you certain?" "I am certain, Hastings, of 2 things. The first, that I know who killed Sir Reginald Cavendish Marlowe. The second, that I do not, at this moment, possess the evidence to prove it. Both must be remedied before 7 o'clock. "Who, Poirot?" The small Belgian regarded him with grave affection. "Mon ami, if I tell you, you will look at the person with eyes that betray everything. No, let us preserve the discretion of the investigator a little longer. Come. I have things to do. The piano awaits." Chapter 11. The nocturne reconsidered at noon, with the air of a man making a polite request of the most ordinary kind. Poirot asked Lady Beatrice if she might consent to play for him, in her sitting room, the Chopin nocturne she had played on Friday evening. At 10 o'clock. She consented. There was no reason to refuse, and a refusal would have aroused precisely the suspicion she most needed to avoid. She seated herself at the small upright piano in her sitting room, opened the music, and began. Poirot stood by the door. Hastings stood beside him. Inspector Goodwin, at Poirot's quiet request, had stationed himself in the corridor outside the dead man's study, half a house away. Lady Beatrice played the nocturne in C-sharp minor. She played it well, with feeling and competence. The faint, sweet notes drifted along the corridor. When she had finished, Poirot bowed and thanked her with extreme courtesy. He and Hastings withdrew. In the corridor, Inspector Goodwin joined them, and the 3 men proceeded to the study, where they shut the door behind them. "Inspector," said Poirot. "I heard it plain enough, sir." From outside the study door, with the door closed, the piano. Faint but quite clear. "And the piece?" "Slow piece, melancholy. Same as you described, sir." Poirot nodded slowly. Then, with the air of a man laying the last card of a long hand, he said, "Inspector, I should be obliged if you would now return to the corridor outside this study. I shall in 2 minutes' time ask Lady Beatrice to play once more. I beg you, when you hear her begin, to take careful note of the precise time and to await my arrival." The inspector, mystified, complied. Poirot and Hastings then walked back to Lady Beatrice's sitting room. Poirot knocked. "Madame, forgive me. One further request. Would you be so good as to play once more? The same nocturne. I find I have not perhaps attended sufficiently." Lady Beatrice, with a slight tightening about the mouth, consented. She seated herself again at the piano. She began to play. But Poirot did not remain in the doorway. He gestured to Hastings to step back, drew the sitting-room door very gently to behind them, and led Hastings at swift, silent pace down the corridor, round the corner, and into a small alcove some 30 feet away, where stood a second, smaller piano, an old upright, much worn, used by Miss Evangeline in her childhood for practice. And there, seated at this second piano in the alcove, was a figure they had not expected. A small, plump, pink-cheeked woman in a black dress and white apron. The under-housekeeper, Mrs. Pritchard. Her fingers moved over the keys with rapid, accomplished ease. The notes that emerged were the notes of Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor, played with feeling, played with skill, played. Hastings realized with a small jolt, in perfect synchronization with the playing of Lady Beatrice in the room beyond. Mrs. Pritchard, sensing their presence, turned with a small cry and stopped playing. Her face went white. Lady Beatrice, in the sitting-room, played on alone. "Madame Pritchard," said Poirot gently, "how long on Friday evening last did Lady Beatrice pay you to play the second piano in her place?" The under-housekeeper's eyes filled. She dropped her hands from the keys. From 9 o'clock, monsieur, until 10. She said she had a private matter, an old letter to compose, that required her to be undisturbed. She said it would be a kindness, monsieur, if I would play, so that no one passing in the corridor should think she was anywhere but at the piano. she said her husband. She said he became distressed when she did not play in the evenings. And you complied, madame, because Lady Beatrice has been kind to you in many small ways. Yes, monsieur. She paid me £5, monsieur, for the kindness. And during that hour, madame, between 9 and 10, you did not see Lady Beatrice in her sitting room. No, monsieur. Thank you. You have done nothing wrong. Pray return to your duties, and speak of this to no one until the inspector permits. When the woman had hurried away, Poirot turned to Hastings, his eyes glittering with the cold, austere satisfaction of a chess player who has executed a long-planned move. And there, Hastings, is our alibi unravelled. Lady Beatrice was not at her piano. She was elsewhere, and elsewhere, mon ami. She was performing the work which has cost her husband his life. Chapter 12. The Gathering at 7. The drawing-room at 7 o'clock was lit by a great fire and by such lamps as Pritchard had ranged about the walls. Beyond the windows the dusk had drawn down, purple and heavy. A storm was rising in the distance. The wind moved among the chimneys with a low, intermittent moan. The household sat in a half-circle, by Poirot's quiet direction, Lady Beatrice in the centre, very pale, in a black dress, Miss Evangeline upon her left. Edmund Cavendish Marlowe slumped in a chair beside the brandy, Dr. Thorne by the fire, Mr. Glenarvan perched anxiously upon a small chair, Lady Wexford to one side, composed and watchful, Mr. Caldwell standing, as ever, by the window. Inspector Goodwin took up his position by the door. 2 constables stood beyond in the hall. Poirot, before the fire, hands folded, his small figure surprisingly commanding, began to speak in a voice that did not rise above its ordinary quiet tone, but which carried, somehow, to every corner of the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I shall not detain you longer than the truth requires. The death of Sir Reginald Cavendish Marlowe was not, as we were intended to believe, a vanishing into mystery. It was a murder, planned with intelligence, executed with cold deliberation, and concealed with a cleverness, I confess, I have rarely encountered. He paused. No one stirred. Let me first dispose of the obvious suspicions. Monsieur Edmund, you had a motive. Your annuity was to be cancelled. You knew this. You were in financial distress. But you, monsieur, are not a man who plans. You are a man who reacts. The plan that killed your brother required weeks of preparation. It was not within you, and you were, on Friday evening, in the billiard room, where the second footman, whom I questioned at length this afternoon, recalls glimpsing you twice through the open door at intervals between 9 and 10. You did not, monsieur. Leave it. Edmund's mouth opened and closed. Mademoiselle Evangeline, you had motive. Your inheritance was to be slashed. Your convictions are of a quality that, in some persons, might drive them to acts of desperation. But you, mademoiselle, are not such a person. You quarrelled with your father openly. You did not conceal your views. A young woman who shouts her grievance in the daylight does not become a murderess in the dark. Moreover, you had a witness. You read in the gallery for half an hour. The footman Reynolds passed through it twice and saw you upon the window seat. Your alibi, mademoiselle, though you offered none, is in fact complete. A small flush of relief and of shame crossed the young woman's face. Monsieur Glenarvan, you knew the terms of the will, but you had nothing to gain by their non-execution. You were paid your fees in either case. You are in the clear, monsieur, save for an over-fondness for confidentiality. The solicitor mopped his brow with great vigour. Dr. Thorne, you were in the smoking-room, attended at intervals by 2 servants. You had, so far as I have discovered, no motive whatsoever. You are not our man. The doctor inclined his head with dry irony. Lady Wexford, you leaned across Sir Reginald at dinner. You held a handkerchief in your hand. I confess, madame, for some hours I considered you most seriously. You had loved him once, and had cause to resent him. Yet I was wrong. You leaned to whisper to him a piece of news, and your handkerchief held. As you yourself shall correct me if I am mistaken, a small note from your daughter in Italy, brought up to you, That very afternoon which you wished him to read. Lady Wexford bowed her head. It was so, monsieur. And finally, Monsieur Caldwell. Caldwell turned from the window. His dark eyes met Poirot's without flinching. You, monsieur, have been the great riddle of this affair. You came to Thornfield Hollow upon business of a private nature. You concealed your prior engagement to Lady Beatrice. You spoke evasively at every turn. I confess, monsieur, that for the larger part of these proceedings I considered you my chief suspect. And now, Monsieur Poirot? And now, monsieur, I know better, for I have at last learnt the nature of your business with Sir Reginald. It was not a business of crime. It was a business of restitution. You came here, Monsieur Caldwell, because Sir Reginald had, some 20 years ago, defrauded your father in a partnership matter, driving him to bankruptcy and to an early death. You traced the affair. You compiled evidence, and you approached Sir Reginald not with violence, but with the threat of a public prosecution. He had agreed at last to make restitution. The papers were to be signed this weekend. Lady Beatrice, your former fiancée, was not party to your business, save that her presence in his household helped you secure access. Is this not so? Caldwell's jaw was tight. He inclined his head once in stiff confirmation. Then, monsieur, you had every reason for Sir Reginald to live and sign your papers, and none for him to die. Your business is concluded by his existence, not his extinction. You are not, sir, our murderer. Caldwell's eyes closed briefly. When he opened them, there was in them the suspicion of moisture. Poirot turned, then, with infinite gentleness, toward the centre of the half-circle, which leaves us, ladies and gentlemen, with Lady Beatrice Cavendish Marlowe. A silence fell so absolute that the wind in the chimney could be heard clearly, and the small ticking of the long case, clock by the door. Lady Beatrice did not move. Her hands lay folded in her black lap. Her copper hair caught the firelight. Her face was perfectly still. Madame, said Poirot in the same gentle voice, you have, throughout these proceedings, maintained that you were at your piano in your sitting-room from 8:45 until 10 on Friday evening. You were not. The under-housekeeper, Madame Pritchard, played a second piano in an alcove some 30 feet from your room, at your instruction, for a payment of £5. From the corridor outside the study, the two pianos sound identical. Anyone passing the corridor, myself, your husband, the servants, would believe you in your sitting-room. You were not. You were elsewhere in the house. A small tremor passed across her hands. She did not speak. At dinner, you waited for the moment when Lady Wexford rose to whisper to your husband. In the small distraction of that movement, every eye drawn that way, you reached from where you sat at the foot of the table and, with the practised gesture of a hostess adjusting a glass, dropped into your husband's wine the chloral hydrate that you had concealed in the small silver vinaigrette at your wrist. Her hand moved, very slightly, to the wrist of her left arm, then stopped. Your husband, drugged, retired to his study. He bolted himself in, intending to read the contents of the envelope which had so disturbed him at dinner. An envelope you yourself had instructed Pritchard to place beneath the library door, containing a note which threatened him in terms calculated to drive him there in haste. He drank. He had a habit of a small whisky at his desk, and within 20 minutes the chloral took him. She closed her eyes. You then unlocked the study, with the duplicate key you had obtained some weeks since from the locksmith Henderson of Reading. I have his receipt. Entered the room, struck your husband upon the temple with the brass weight from his desk, and dragged his body through the disused servants' passage which runs behind the wainscot of the study and gives upon the corridor of the western wing. You took the sapphire from the safe, to which you well knew the combination, despite your protestations, to suggest a robbery. You carried with the great effort of which a determined woman is capable your husband's body up the spiral stair of the disused tower where you laid it for some hours upon the chest in the upper chamber. You returned. You bolted the study from within. using a length of dark thread, looped about the bolt and drawn under the door. An old trick, madame, and one for which I have found the small mark upon the wood. You wedged the chair beneath the handle and emerged through the door into the corridor, then closed it after you. Drawing your thread free, you returned to your sitting room by way of the back stair, paid Madame Pritchard, and resumed your piano at 5 minutes to 10, at which moment, by perfect timing, you yourself were heard, faintly, by anyone passing. She had not opened her eyes. In the small hours of Saturday morning, you returned to the tower with the assistance of a thrown rope and a torn handful of ivy contrived for our distraction, conveyed your husband's body down to the lake by means of the small handcart kept in the boathouse, and consigned it to the water, the cuff-link in the tower, the footprint in the flower-bed. Those were the small details that betrayed you. You are the most intelligent woman, madame, but you are not, perhaps, a countrywoman. You did not know how deeply a body in a man's boots will sink into wet loam. At last she opened her eyes. She looked at Poirot with an expression of immense, weary stillness. "And the motive, madame," he said gently, "was not, I think, the inheritance. You did not yet know that the will was being altered in your favour. Sir Reginald had not told you, and Monsieur Glenarvan confirms he never would have done so before the signing. No, madame, the motive was older and simpler. Your husband was a man, as Lady Wexford has movingly testified, who pursued what he could not have, and was cruel to what he could. He had for 6 years made your life a small and quiet torment, of which only you, perhaps, knew the daily measure. You did not kill him for money, you killed him for peace." There was a long silence. The fire crackled. Lady Beatrice's hands lay still in her lap. Then she spoke, and her voice was steady and clear, and almost relieved. "I do not deny it, Monsieur Poirot." Chapter 13. The Quiet Departure. They took her away in the morning. There was no scene. She walked between the constables with the same composed, copper-haired dignity she had carried at the head of the dinner-table on Friday night. And her last gesture in the great hall of Thornfield, Hollow was to turn, very briefly, and to incline her head to Mr. Julian Caldwell, who stood by the foot of the staircase with his face turned to the wall. Caldwell did not see her bow. Hastings, watching, was almost glad of it. There are some farewells that should not be witnessed. Miss Evangeline saw her father's body laid out, and wept at last. Wept not, perhaps, for the man who had been, but for the father who might have been, and was not, and now never would be. Edmund Cavendish Marlowe stopped drinking by Wednesday morning, and confessed to Poirot, in a halting and very ungainly speech, that he was ashamed of much in his life, and meant to make a beginning of doing better. Whether he did is not, perhaps, a question for this narrative. Lady Wexford left on Monday, leaving with Poirot a small note that read, "Thank you for being kind to her at the end." Mr. Glenarvan left also, much subdued, with a great quantity of paperwork to be unmade and made again. Dr. Thorne stayed an extra day to attend to the formalities, and proved, when at length he and Poirot took a glass of port together in the dead man's study, to be a man of considerably more feeling than his manner had revealed. Mr. Caldwell left last. He sought out Poirot before his departure, and shook the small Belgian's hand with a long, silent grip. "Monsieur Poirot, may I ask, was she, at the end, did she acted, monsieur, from a place of long suffering. Whether the act was justified, that is not for me to say. But she was not, I think, evil. She was a woman who had endured too long, and chose at last a wrong path out of her endurance. That is a tragedy, monsieur, not a triumph for any of us." Caldwell nodded. His eyes were dry, but his mouth was set in a way that suggested the dryness was a discipline rather than a state. Will she hang, Monsieur Poirot?" "That, monsieur, is for the courts. The plea of provocation is open to her. A good counsel, and she will live. A great counsel, and she may even, in some years, walk free. Then I shall pay for the great counsel." "That is a noble thing, monsieur." "It is not a noble thing. It is the only thing left to me to do. He pressed Poirot's hand once more and was gone. Poirot and Hastings departed Thornfield Hollow on Tuesday morning, in the same Daimler that had brought them. The mist had lifted at last. A thin watery sunshine touched the wet copper leaves and made of the lake a silver sheet. Behind them, the old grey house receded into the trees, and Hastings, looking back, felt, as one always does at the close of such affairs, a great mingling of relief and melancholy. "Poirot, tell me, when did you first suspect her?" The little Belgian considered. He brushed a small speck of lint from his trouser leg. "When she watched Caldwell, mon ami, at dinner on the night of the disappearance. The look upon her face when her husband received the threatening note. It was the look of a woman watching to see whether her plan was working. She had arranged the note, you see, herself. Pritchard found it under the library door, placed there by Lady Beatrice's own hand earlier that afternoon. Her glance at Caldwell was, I believe, an instinctive look for the man she once loved. A moment of weakness, a kind of unspoken plea. Forgive me what I am about to do. But it was the wrong look at the wrong moment, and I observed it. And the piano? The piano was the moment my suspicion became conviction. I am a man, Hastings, who attends to small things. The first nocturne we heard, when we approached the study at 10, was a piece in C-sharp minor, the piece Lady Beatrice played in her sitting room on the afternoon when I first sat in her presence was the same nocturne. But she played it differently. The rubato was different. The phrasing was a shade more masculine. I thought at first I was imagining things, but when Madame Pritchard played for me, when I heard the under-housekeeper, a competent amateur, attempt the same piece, I knew at once that it was she who had played on Friday night. "You're a fiend, Poirot. I am a man, mon ami, who notices. That is all." They drove on in companionable silence through the lanes. Poirot at length spoke again more quietly. "Hastings, there is in every crime, you know, a measure of justice. The murderer is not always the only person who has done wrong. Sir Reginald was not a good man. He had ruined Caldwell's father. He had broken the heart of his first wife. He had been cold to his daughter, and contemptuous of his brother, and cruel, quietly cruel in the way of those whose cruelty never quite shows above the parapet, to his second wife. He did not deserve to die. No man deserves to be murdered, but he did not deserve either the comfortable old age which his murder denied him. The thing is sad, mon ami, all round. Yet the law must be served. The law must be served, yes, but also, perhaps, mercy. I have written to Caldwell's counsel. I shall, when called, give such evidence as supports the plea of provocation. I shall not lie, but I shall tell the truth in such a way as to bring her, perhaps, before judges with mercy in their eyes. You really are an old softy under it all, Poirot." "I am, mon ami, a man who has lived 70 years, and who understands at last that justice without mercy is only vengeance dressed in robes." He paused. Then, with a small characteristic flourish, he produced from his pocket the silver case of his cigarettes, the long, slender Russian cigarettes he favoured, and lit one with great care. "And now, Hastings, we shall return to London. There is, I believe, a most curious case of a missing parrot in Putney, upon which Inspector Japp wishes my advice. The thing involves, I gather, a retired admiral, a Polish ballet master, and a quantity of disputed pearls. We shall not, I hope, be bored." Hastings laughed. "With you, Poirot, one is never bored. With Hastings, mon ami, one is never alone. That, perhaps, is the better thing." And the Daimler bore them down the long lane between the dripping hedgerows, away from Thornfield Hollow, away from the closed chapter of Sir Reginald, Cavendish Marlowe, into the pale autumn morning, and toward whatever new strangeness should next, in the inscrutable shuffle of human affairs, find its way to the doorstep of a small, neat, fastidious Belgian gentleman in a flat in Whitehaven Mansions.